The leather-clad giant felt the tiny fingers dig into his forearm before he heard her voice. Rocco Tank Morrison had seen a lot in his 43 years. War zones, bar fights, Brotherhood forged in fire and chrome, but nothing had ever stopped him cold quite like the trembling child now clinging to him. Outside the roadside diner, her cheeks were streaked with tears, her blonde hair tangled, and her eyes held a terror that made his blood run cold. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Uncle hit Mommy. She won't wake up." The bacon cheeseburger Tank had been craving for the last 100 miles suddenly meant nothing. Around him, 5 other members of the Steel Riders MC were dismounting their bikes, their conversation dying as they caught the look on his face. These men, decorated with tattoos and scars, men that society often crossed the street to avoid, instantly transformed. They saw what Tank saw, a child in crisis and a woman who needed help. "Where's your mama, sweetheart?" Tank asked, his gravelly voice softening in a way that would have surprised anyone who didn't really know him. He knelt down, making himself smaller, less intimidating. The little girl, she couldn't have been more than 6, pointed with a shaking hand toward a rundown setting at the edge of the parking lot. Through the driver's side window, they could see a woman slumped over the steering wheel, motionless. Standing beside the car, a man in a stained undershirt was frantically looking around, his body language screaming guilt and panic. Tank's jaw tightened. He'd grown up in a house where his mother bore the bruises of his father's rage. He'd sworn on her grave that he'd never stand by when a woman needed protecting. Not ever again. "Rico, call 911, Tank ordered, his voice carrying the authority of a former Marine Corps sergeant. "Spider, get your phone out and start recording everything. Diesel, you're with me. Tiny Ace, watch the kid and make sure she's safe." The bikers moved with military precision, years of riding together creating an unspoken language. Rico already had his phone to his ear. Tiny, ironically the biggest of them all at 6'5", was gently guiding the little girl away from the scene, offering her his bandana to wipe her tears. Tank and Diesel approached the sedan, their boots heavy on the asphalt. The man by the car, mid-30s, twitchy, reeking of cheap whiskey even from 10 feet away, spotted them and straightened up. "This ain't your business," he snarled, but his eyes darted nervously between the 2 bikers. "That's my sister and my niece. Family business." "Family business?" Tank's voice was deadly quiet. "That woman is unconscious and that little girl is terrified." That became everybody's business. Diesel moved to the passenger side, peering through the window. "She's breathing," he called out. "But she's got visible injuries. Looks like she took a hit to the head." The man took a step back, his bravado crumbling. "She was being hysterical, okay? We were just talking and she got in my face, and I just pushed her a little." "You just pushed her?" Tank's hands clenched into fists, every fiber of his being. Wanted to show this coward what it felt like to be on the receiving end of violence. But he'd learned discipline. Learned that true strength wasn't about throwing punches. It was about standing between the weak and those who'd harm them. The sound of sirens grew in the distance. It had been maybe 3 minutes since the little girl had grabbed his arm. 3 minutes that felt like hours. Spider, still recording, had positioned himself where he could capture everything. The unconscious woman, the man's increasingly nervous demeanor, the protective semicircle the bikers had formed around the vehicle. "Officers are 2 minutes out," Rico reported, jogging back from where he'd been guiding the emergency vehicles in. "Ambulance right behind them." The man made a sudden move toward the driver's door, clearly intending to get to the woman or perhaps flee. Tank moved faster, blocking his path with a wall of leather and muscle. "You're not going anywhere near her," Tank said. His voice carried no threat, it was simply a statement of fact. Behind him, Diesel had carefully opened the passenger door and was talking softly to the woman, who was beginning to stir. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Help is coming. You're safe now." 2 patrol cars screamed into the parking lot, followed closely by an ambulance. The officers emerged with hands on their weapons, clearly uncertain about the scene before them. 6 bikers surrounding a vehicle and a belligerent man. "I'm Sergeant Morrison, retired USMC, Tank announced clearly, his hands visible and non-threatening. "We witnessed this situation. The child came to us saying her uncle had hit her mother. The woman was unconscious when we arrived. This man was attempting to leave the scene. We have video documentation of everything that occurred after we intervened. One of the officers, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, quickly assessed the situation. Her partner kept the man separated while she approached the sedan. The paramedics were already working on the woman, checking her vitals, examining the swelling bruise on her temple. Sarah Jennings? The officer said, recognizing the victim. Danny, that's her brother, Michael Torres. We've been to their mother's house twice this month on domestic disputes. Everything happened quickly after that. The woman, Sarah, regained consciousness and, through tears and pain, confirmed what had happened. Michael had been drunk, demanding money, had exploded when she refused. He'd hit her so hard she'd blacked out. And her daughter, Emma, had run for help, finding Tank and his brothers. Michael was arrested, his protests falling on deaf. Ears as he was, read his rights and placed in the back of a patrol car. Spider's video footage was transferred to the officer's devices, providing clear documentation of Michael's admission and behavior. But Tank wasn't watching the arrest. He was watching Tiny, still crouched down with little Emma, showing her pictures on his phone of his own daughter, making her giggle through her tears by doing a terrible impression of a cartoon character. Sarah was loaded into the ambulance, and Emma began to cry again, terrified of being separated from her mother. "Can someone ride with us?" one of the paramedics asked. "The child is traumatized. She needs someone." Tank stepped forward without hesitation. "I'll go." He looked down at Emma. "Your mama needs you to be brave right now. Little warrior, will you let me ride with you to make sure she's okay?" Emma looked up at this massive, bearded stranger who'd answered her desperate plea for help. She nodded and slipped her tiny hand into his calloused one. At the hospital, while doctors treated Sarah's concussion and documented her injuries for the prosecutors, Tank sat with Emma in the waiting room. His brothers had followed on their bikes, and they'd taken turns entertaining the little girl, Ace doing magic tricks with quarters, Rico teaching her a handshake, Diesel letting her color on his arms with washable markers. When Sarah was finally released, heavily medicated but stable, she found her daughter asleep against Tank's shoulder, his leather jacket draped over her like a blanket. The tears that fell down. Sarah's bruised face were different this time. Tears of gratitude, of overwhelming relief. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Tank carefully shifted so Emma wouldn't wake. "You don't need to thank us, ma'am. We just did what anyone should do." "But not everyone would," Sarah said. "Most people would have looked away, pretended they didn't see, didn't want to get involved." Rico stepped forward, his voice gentle. "We've all got people we couldn't protect once upon a time. So now, when we can, we do. Simple as that." The Steel Riders made sure Sarah and Emma got home safely that night, following them to Sarah's mother's house where they'd be staying. Before they left, Tank pressed a card into Sarah's hand with his number on it. "You call if you need anything. If he makes bail, if you feel unsafe, anything. We're not far, and we look after our own. You and Emma, you're our own now." As the 6 bikers rode off into the twilight, their engines rumbling in harmony, none of them felt like heroes. They'd simply done what decent humans should do, stood up for someone who couldn't stand for themselves, protected the vulnerable, answered a little girl's desperate cry for help. Emma watched from the window as the bikers disappeared down the road, their taillights fading into red dots. She thought they looked like dragons, scary on the outside, but breathing fire only to protect. Her uncle was in jail. Her mother was safe. And she'd learned something important. Sometimes heroes wear leather jackets and ride motorcycles, and sometimes all you have to do is ask for help and someone will answer. In the days that followed, Sarah pressed charges, and with the bikers' testimony and video evidence, Michael was denied bail and faced serious charges. The Steel Riders checked in regularly, and when Sarah's car finally died completely, they organized a fundraiser at a local bar that raised enough money for her to buy a reliable vehicle. Emma started calling them her uncles, the good kind, and they wore that title with fierce pride. Tank never did get that bacon cheeseburger that day, but every time he felt the phantom grip of tiny fingers on his forearm, every time he remembered the trust in a frightened child's eyes, he knew he'd gained something far more valuable than any meal. He'd gained the chance to be the man he wished had been there for his own mother. And in 5 minutes, that changed everything. He and his brothers proved that compassion has no uniform, heroism has no dress code, and humanity, real, raw, beautiful humanity, can be found in the most unexpected places.